The gunshot echoed across the dusty plains, sending a flock of startled ravens into the crisp October sky as Nora Sinclair fled through the golden prairie grass of Wyoming Territory, 1875. Blood trickled down her arm, but the pain was nothing compared to the terror clawing at her chest. Behind her, the shouts of men and the thunder of hooves grew louder, each passing second bringing her pursuers closer to their prey. "There she is," a man's voice bellowed. "Don't let her get away." Nora's lungs burned as she pushed herself harder, the hem of her tattered dress catching on brambles. She'd been running for days, sleeping in ditches, stealing food when she could, and always keeping one eye on the horizon. The bounty on her head was enough to tempt any desperate soul in these harsh lands. Just as her legs threatened to give out, she spotted a small ravine cutting through the landscape. With a final burst of energy, she slid down the embankment, loose rocks tumbling after her. At the bottom, she pressed her back against the cool earth, praying her pursuers would pass by without noticing her hiding place. The hoofbeats stopped. Men's voices murmured above. Nora held her breath, clutching the small leather pouch hanging around her neck, the very reason they hunted her. "She couldn't have gone far," a gruff voice said. "Fan out. There's $500 for whoever brings her back alive." Tears blurred Nora's vision as she surveyed her surroundings. The ravine stretched both ways, offering a possible escape route. Keeping low, she began to crawl westward, away from the voices. Her wounded arm throbbed with each movement. After what felt like hours, the ravine widened and opened onto a small creek. Nora followed it downstream, washing away her tracks in the water. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the landscape as she finally collapsed beneath a gnarled cottonwood tree. "They'll hunt me forever," she whispered to herself, clutching the pouch containing the evidence that could send powerful men to the gallows, evidence of corruption, murder, and theft that had cost her everything. As darkness fell, Nora began to shiver. She needed shelter, food, and someone to tend her wound. In the distance, she spotted a faint light, perhaps a homestead or ranch. With no better options, she forced her aching body to move once more. The small ranch house sat nestled against a backdrop of pine trees, with a barn and corral nearby. Nora approached cautiously, ready to flee at the first sign of danger. Through a window, she could see a man sitting alone at a table, cleaning a rifle by lamplight. Gathering her courage, she crept to the barn instead. Inside, the warm smell of hay and horses greeted her. She sank down in a corner stall, finally allowing exhaustion to overcome her. "I wouldn't get too comfortable if I were you." Nora jolted awake, her hand automatically reaching for the knife hidden in her boot. A tall figure stood in the doorway, his features obscured by shadow, a rifle held loosely in his hands. "Please," she whispered, "I'm not looking for trouble. I just need a place to rest for the night." The man stepped forward, and the moonlight streaming through the barn window illuminated his face. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 26 or 27, with keen blue eyes and a strong jawline shadowed with stubble. A cowboy, judging by his worn leather chaps and the Stetson pushed back on his head. "You're bleeding," he observed, nodding toward her arm. "It's nothing." "Doesn't look like nothing." He set his rifle aside and approached slowly, as one might a wounded animal. "I'm Samuel Dawson." "This is my ranch." "Nora," she replied, deliberately omitting her surname. "Just Nora." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Well, just Nora. Seems to me you're in a heap of trouble. That wound needs tending and you look half-starved." She tensed as he extended his hand. "Why would you help me?" "You don't know anything about me." "I know someone's after you," Samuel said quietly, "and I know what it's like to be hunted." Something in his tone made Nora believe him. Hesitantly, she accepted his outstretched hand and allowed him to lead her to the house. Once inside, Samuel lit more lamps and motioned for her to sit at the table. He disappeared briefly, returning with a basin of water, clean cloths, and a bottle of whiskey. "This will sting," he warned, pouring some of the amber liquid onto her wound. Nora bit her lip to keep from crying out as the alcohol burned through her flesh. Samuel worked efficiently, cleaning the bullet graze and wrapping it with a bandage. "Looks like it just nicked you," he said. "You're lucky." Lucky isn't exactly how I describe my situation, Nora replied bitterly. Samuel moved to the stove where a pot of stew still simmered. He ladled a generous portion into a bowl and set it before her along with a chunk of bread. Eat, he instructed. Then you can tell me who's after you and why. Nora devoured the food, realizing she hadn't eaten properly in days. Between bites, she studied her unexpected host. Samuel Dawson was undeniably handsome, with a quiet strength about him. His ranch was small but well kept, and he lived alone from what she could tell. "Thank you," she said when she'd finished. "I should go now, in the middle of the night, with men hunting you." Samuel shook his head. "That's foolish, and you don't strike me as a fool, Nora. You don't understand. These men, they're dangerous. I can't stay here and put you at risk." "Who are they?" Nora hesitated, her fingers unconsciously finding the leather pouch beneath her collar. "Men who work for Edgar Blackwell." Samuel's expression darkened. "The railroad baron, the very same. I was a governess in his household in Cheyenne for his daughter. I saw things I wasn't supposed to see, heard conversations about bribes, about people who opposed him disappearing." She swallowed hard. 2 weeks ago, I found documents in his study proof that he orchestrated the murder of 3 homesteaders who refused to sell their land for the railroad." Samuel's eyes widened. "And you took these documents?" Nora nodded, pulling out the pouch to reveal several folded papers. "I was going to take them to the territorial marshal in Laramie, but Blackwell's men caught me leaving town. They've been chasing me ever since." "Edgar Blackwell has half the territory's officials in his pocket," Samuel said grimly. "Even if you reach the marshal, there's no guarantee he'd help." "I have to try. These families deserve justice." Tears welled in Nora's eyes. "But I'm so tired of running, they'll hunt me forever." Samuel's jaw tightened as he gazed out the window into the darkness. When he turned back to her, determination burned in his eyes. "Let them try to pass me first." The simple declaration hung in the air between them. Nora stared at him, unable to comprehend why this stranger would risk his life for her. "You don't even know me," she whispered. "I know enough," Samuel replied. "I know what it's like to stand alone against powerful men. And I know that sometimes all it takes is one person willing to help." That night, Nora slept in Samuel's bed while he took a chair by the door, rifle across his lap. Despite her exhaustion, she woke frequently, haunted by nightmares of pursuit. Each time, the sight of Samuel's vigilant silhouette against the moonlit window brought her comfort. When dawn broke, Samuel was already up, preparing breakfast and plotting their next move. "We can't stay here," he explained, setting a plate of eggs and bacon before her. "They'll be scouring every homestead and ranch in the area. I have a friend, Nathan Cross, who has a cabin in the mountains. We'll head there and figure out how to get your evidence to someone who can use it." "What about your ranch?" Nora asked, guilt tugging at her heart. Samuel shrugged. "My foreman can handle things for a while. I've been meaning to check on that mountain pasture anyway." The casual way he dismissed potentially abandoning his livelihood for her stunned Nora into silence. They left within the hour, Samuel riding his sturdy buckskin gelding with Nora behind him, her arms wrapped tentatively around his waist. He'd packed provisions, ammunition, and extra clothing, leaving a note for his foreman that revealed nothing of their true purpose. As they rode into the foothills, Samuel pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the land. Despite their precarious situation, Nora found herself relaxing against his broad back, drawing strength from his steady presence. "How did you end up ranching alone?" she asked as they paused to rest the horse. A shadow passed over Samuel's face. "I wasn't always alone. My brother and I started this place together after the war, built it from nothing." He gazed at the distant mountains. 2 years ago, men like Blackwell came around wanting our water rights. When we refused to sell, they framed my brother for rustling. He died in a jailbreak attempt." "I'm so sorry," Nora whispered. "Since then, I've kept to myself, focused on the ranch." His eyes met hers. "Until you showed up bleeding in my barn." Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of shared loss, of battles fought alone. Their moment of connection was shattered by the distant sound of hoofbeats. Samuel tensed, pulling Nora behind a rocky outcropping just as 6 riders appeared on the trail below them. "Blackwell's men," Nora breathed, recognizing the leader, a ruthless gun-for-hire named Jenkins who'd been trailing her since Cheyenne. Samuel nodded grimly. They're following our tracks. He led the horse deeper into the cover of pine trees. We need to throw them off our trail. They rode hard through a shallow stream, doubling back and taking a steeper, less obvious path into the mountains. By nightfall, they'd reached a small plateau overlooking the valley. No signs of pursuit could be seen, but Samuel insisted on keeping watch. As they huddled beside a small, carefully hidden fire, Nora studied the documents by firelight. "These men died because they wouldn't sell their homes," she said softly, "and Blackwell made it look like an Indian raid." "It's an old trick," Samuel replied. "Blame the tribes for the violence while stealing their land too." He added another small branch to the fire. "The railroad has been doing it across the territory. How do men like Blackwell sleep at night?" "On expensive feather beds, I reckon," Samuel said with a wry smile that faded quickly. "Men like that don't see people, just obstacles." They reached Nathan Cross's cabin the following afternoon. The small, sturdy structure was tucked away in a hidden valley with a clear mountain stream nearby. Nathan himself was absent, gone to Denver according to the note left inside, but had indicated friends were welcome to use the place. "We should be safe here for a few days," Samuel said, unsaddling his horse. "Time enough to rest and plan our next move." Nora explored the cabin while Samuel tended to their mount. It was simple but comfortable, with a stone fireplace, a table and chairs, a small kitchen area, and a single bed in the corner. She froze when this last detail registered, suddenly acutely aware of the intimacy their situation demanded. When Samuel returned, he noticed her discomfort immediately. "I'll sleep by the fire," he said gently. "You take the bed." "You don't have to, I insist," he interrupted. "My ma raised me better than to make a lady sleep on the floor." That evening, as they shared a meal of rabbit stew Samuel had prepared, Nora found herself studying him openly. In the glow of the firelight, the hardness that typically guarded his features had softened. She noticed details she'd missed before: a small scar above his right eyebrow, the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he smiled, the careful gentleness of his calloused hands. "Tell me about your life before all this," Samuel said, breaking the comfortable silence. Who is Nora when she's not running from railroad barons? The question caught her off guard. It had been so long since anyone had shown interest in her as a person rather than an employee or a fugitive. "I grew up in St. Louis," she began hesitantly. "My father was a schoolteacher. Both my parents died in a typhoid epidemic when I was 17. I had some education, so I became a governess." She traced patterns on the wooden table with her fingertip. "I've spent the past 5 years raising other people's children, living in other people's homes. And now—" Nora laughed softly. "Now I'm the most wanted woman in Wyoming Territory." "That's not what I meant," Samuel said, his voice gentle. "What do you want for yourself, Nora, once this is over?" The question stirred something in her, a longing she'd buried beneath practicality and survival. "I've never had the luxury of wanting things," she admitted. "But I suppose, a place of my own, maybe a small school where I could teach children who couldn't otherwise get an education. That's a fine dream." "What about you?" she asked. "What does Samuel Dawson want from life?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. "After my brother died, I stopped wanting much of anything, just kept the ranch going because it was what we'd built together." His eyes found hers across the table. "But lately, I've been remembering what it's like to have something worth fighting for." The weight of his words hung between them, heavy with implication. Nora felt her cheeks warm under his steady gaze, her heart beating a rapid rhythm against her ribs. For the first time in weeks, the fear that had been her constant companion receded, replaced by a different kind of tension. "We should get some rest," she said finally, rising from the table. "Tomorrow we can figure out our next steps." But sleep proved elusive as Nora lay in Nathan Cross's bed, listening to Samuel's steady breathing across the room. Her mind raced with possibilities and dangers, and beneath it all, the unsettling awareness of the man sleeping just feet away, a man who'd risked everything to help her, who looked at her as if she mattered. days at the cabin fell into a rhythm. They took turns keeping watch, spent hours discussing ways to get the documents to trustworthy authorities, and shared the daily tasks of cooking and maintaining their temporary home. In quiet moments, they exchanged stories of their lives. Samuel spoke of his time fighting in the war, of building the ranch with his brother, of the harsh beauty of Wyoming that had captured his heart. Nora told him about the children she'd taught, the books she loved, and her dreams of a different life. On the fourth day, while hunting in the nearby forest, Samuel spotted riders in the valley below. He returned to the cabin at a run. "They've found us," he said grimly, gathering their belongings, "or they're close enough that we can't risk staying." They fled higher into the mountains, finding shelter in an abandoned mining shack as a storm rolled in. Rain hammered the tin roof as thunder shook the tiny structure. Huddled together for warmth, the last barriers between them began to crumble. "I'm sorry I brought this danger to your door," Nora whispered as lightning illuminated the determination in Samuel's face. "I'm not," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "If you hadn't, I'd still be half alive, going through the motions at the ranch. And now you might not be alive at all if Blackwell's men find us." Samuel's hand found hers in the darkness. "Some things are worth the risk, Nora." She knew he wasn't just talking about the documents or bringing Blackwell to justice. The realization sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. The storm passed, but their pursuers remained somewhere in the mountains, forcing them to move cautiously from one hiding place to another. Samuel's knowledge of the terrain kept them one step ahead, but supplies were running low, and both knew they couldn't continue evading indefinitely. "There's a settlement 2 days' ride from here," Samuel told her one evening as they camped in a sheltered canyon. "A friend from the war, Benjamin Porter, is the marshal there. If anyone would help us, it's him." "Can we trust him?" Nora asked, fear making her voice sharp. "How do you know Blackwell hasn't bought him too?" Ben lost his farm to a railroad land grab in Kansas. "Trust me, he has no love for men like Blackwell." Samuel took her hand. "I wouldn't risk your safety if I wasn't certain, Nora." The sincerity in his eyes melted her doubts. She nodded, allowing her fingers to lace through his. They set out at dawn, keeping to rugged terrain where possible to mask their trail. By midday, they'd covered considerable ground, and Samuel suggested they rest in a secluded grove near a small spring. As Nora knelt to fill their canteens, she heard Samuel draw in a sharp breath. She looked up to see him staring at something behind her, his hand moving slowly toward his gun. "Don't move," he said quietly. Nora froze, then slowly turned her head. 20 yards away, a massive grizzly bear stood on its hind legs, sniffing the air. "Back away very slowly," Samuel murmured. "Get to the horse." They retreated inch by inch. The bear dropped to all fours, watching them with intelligent eyes. Just as they reached their mount, it let out a roar and charged. Samuel pushed Nora onto the horse, slapping its flank to send it galloping away while he raised his rifle. The shot echoed through the canyon, but in his haste, it only grazed the bear's shoulder, enraging it further. From horseback, Nora watched in horror as Samuel dove aside just as the bear reached him. He rolled to his feet, drawing his hunting knife as the massive creature turned for another charge. Without thinking, Nora wheeled the horse around and galloped back, drawing her own small revolver. She fired 3 rapid shots, not aiming to kill but to distract. The bear hesitated, caught between 2 threats. That moment was all Samuel needed. He retreated to a narrow space between 2 boulders where the bear couldn't easily reach, firing his revolver point blank into the animal's chest. With a final, mournful sound, the bear collapsed. "Are you hurt?" Nora cried, dismounting and running to him. Samuel was breathing hard, his shirt torn but otherwise uninjured. "I'm all right," he assured her, then added with a mixture of admiration and exasperation, "What were you thinking, coming back like that?" "I was thinking I couldn't let you die," Nora replied, her voice breaking. "Not for me." "Not after everything." Something shifted in Samuel's expression. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them. His hand, still trembling slightly from adrenaline, came up to cup her cheek. "Nora Sinclair," he said softly, using her full name for the first time since she'd revealed it to him. "I would face 100 bears for you." Then he was kissing her, and Nora was kissing him back with an intensity that surprised them both. All the tension, fear, and growing affection of the past days poured into that embrace, transforming into something neither had expected to find while fleeing for their lives. When they finally broke apart, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "I didn't plan on this happening," he admitted. Nora laughed softly. "Neither did I." She traced the line of his jaw with her fingertips. "But I'm glad it did." They made camp that night beneath a canopy of stars, their bedrolls placed side by side. As Nora drifted towards sleep in the circle of Samuel's arms, she felt a peace that had eluded her since fleeing Cheyenne. That peace was shattered at dawn. The crack of a rifle shot sent birds scattering from nearby trees. Samuel was on his feet instantly, pulling Nora with him as a bullet splintered the log where they'd been sitting. "Run!" he shouted, grabbing his rifle and firing back at the unseen attackers. They fled through the trees, bullets whizzing past them. Their horse, startled by the gunfire, had bolted, leaving them on foot in unfamiliar territory. "There," Samuel pointed to a narrow ravine. "We can lose them in there." They scrambled down the steep slope, loose rocks tumbling around them. At the bottom, they pressed themselves against the rock wall, listening to the shouts above. "I count 4 of them," Samuel whispered, "Jenkins and 3 others." "They'll follow us down here," Nora said, panic rising in her throat. Samuel nodded grimly. "But they'll have to come one at a time through that narrow entrance. We can use that." He positioned himself behind a boulder near the ravine entrance, rifle ready. Nora crouched nearby with her revolver, trying to control her trembling hands. The first man appeared at the ravine entrance, scanning the shadows cautiously. Samuel's shot caught him in the shoulder, sending him tumbling down the slope with a cry of pain. The others responded with a hail of bullets that ricocheted off the rock walls. "We know you're in there, Dawson." Jenkins's voice echoed down the ravine. "Hand over the woman and those papers, and maybe we'll let you walk away. You'll have to come and get them," Samuel called back, quickly reloading. A second man tried to enter the ravine from a different angle. Nora fired twice, forcing him to retreat. The standoff continued as the morning wore on, with occasional exchanges of gunfire but no clear advantage for either side. "We can wait all day," Jenkins shouted. "You got nowhere to go," he was right. They were trapped in the ravine with limited ammunition and no food or water. As the sun climbed higher, the heat became oppressive in their rocky prison. "We need to make a move before nightfall," Samuel said quietly. "Once it's dark, they'll have the advantage." Nora surveyed their surroundings with desperate eyes. The ravine continued deeper into the mountainside, narrowing to a point where sunlight barely penetrated. "Maybe there's another way out further in," she suggested. Together, they crept deeper into the ravine, staying close to the walls to avoid being spotted. The passage twisted and narrowed, forcing them to squeeze through tight spaces. Just as Nora was beginning to fear they'd trapped themselves further, the ravine opened into a small, hidden valley. "Look," she pointed to a thin trail winding up the far side of the valley. "That might lead back to the main trail." They hurried across the open space, conscious of their vulnerability. The trail was steep and treacherous, but eventually brought them to higher ground on the opposite side of the mountain from their pursuers. "We've bought some time," Samuel said, "but they'll figure out what happened soon enough. We need to reach Ben's town before they catch up." They traveled through the night, navigating by stars and Samuel's knowledge of the mountains. By dawn, exhaustion threatened to overcome them both, but the sight of smoke rising from chimneys in the distance gave them renewed energy. Sweetwater was a small but prosperous mining town nestled in a valley. As they approached its outskirts, Samuel pulled Nora into the shelter of a stand of trees. "We can't just walk in," he said. "Blackwell might have men watching the town. I'll go find Ben, bring him to you." "No," Nora gripped his arm. "We stay together. I'm tired of hiding." After a brief argument, Samuel reluctantly agreed. They entered town from the north, keeping to side streets and avoiding the main thoroughfare. The marshal's office was a small building near the center of town, its front door propped open to catch the morning breeze. Inside, a broad-shouldered man with a graying beard looked up from his desk as they entered. Recognition flashed in his eyes at the sight of Samuel. "Sam Dawson," he said, rising to his feet. "Been a few years." "Too long, Ben," Samuel replied, glancing back at the street before closing the door. "We need your help." Marshal Benjamin Porter listened intently as they related their story, examining the documents from Blackwell with a deepening frown. When they finished, he sat back in his chair, stroking his beard thoughtfully. "Blackwell's got friends in high places," he said finally. "But these papers, especially that ledger showing payments to kill those homesteaders, that's enough to bring him down if we get it to the right people." "That's why we came to you," Samuel said. "Who can we trust?" "Judge William Harper in Denver," Ben replied without hesitation. "He's been trying to build a case against railroad corruption for years. With this evidence and your testimony, Miss Sinclair, he could finally succeed." "How do we get to Denver?" Nora asked. "Blackwell's men are right behind us." Ben smiled for the first time. "As it happens, I'm escorting a prisoner to Denver tomorrow. Train leaves at noon. You'll ride in the marshal's car with me officially as my deputies." Hope flared in Nora's chest. "They wouldn't dare attack a marshal's car, not openly," Ben cautioned. "But Blackwell's desperate now. We'll need to stay alert." He arranged for them to spend the night in a room above the general store, owned by his sister, who asked no questions and provided them with fresh clothing and a hot meal. Alone together for the first time since their kiss in the forest, Samuel and Nora found themselves suddenly shy. "You should take the bed," Samuel said, falling back on formality. "I'll sleep on the floor." Nora stepped closer to him, placing her hands on his chest. "Or we could both take the bed," she suggested quietly. Samuel's breath caught. "Nora, I don't want you to think. I don't think anything except that I want to be close to you," she interrupted. "We almost died yesterday and the day before that, and we might still die tomorrow." Her eyes held his. "I don't want to waste the time we have." He cradled her face in his hands. "I've fallen in love with you, Nora Sinclair," he confessed. "It happened so fast it terrifies me, but I know it's true." "I love you too," she whispered against his lips. "And that terrifies me even more." That night, they found solace in each other's arms, their passion tempered by tenderness, their fears momentarily forgotten in the sanctuary they created together. Morning came too soon, bringing with it the renewed weight of their dangerous mission. They dressed in the deputies' uniforms Ben had provided, the star-shaped badges glinting in the sunlight. "You wear that better than most men I've deputized," Ben remarked to Nora as they prepared to leave for the station. Her hair was tucked up under a hat, her slight figure disguised by the loose-fitting clothes. The train waited at the small station, steam billowing from its engine. They boarded the marshal's car directly behind the tender, Ben's prisoner a sullen cattle rustler already secured inside. As the train pulled away from Sweetwater, Nora felt a momentary lightening of the burden she'd carried since fleeing Cheyenne. Denver was just 8 hours away. Soon, the documents would be in Judge Harper's hands and her ordeal might finally end. She should have known it wouldn't be that simple. Halfway to Denver, as the train wound through a narrow mountain pass, Ben suddenly tensed, peering out the window. "Riders," he said grimly. "Coming fast." 6 men on horseback were galloping alongside the tracks, gaining on the train. At their head rode Jenkins, his face twisted with determination. "They're going to try to board," Samuel said, checking his revolver. Ben moved to secure his prisoner, then took up position at one window while Samuel and Nora covered the others. The train picked up speed, but the horsemen matched its pace, drawing closer to the cars. The first shots came from Jenkins, bullets shattering the window near Nora's head. She ducked, then returned fire, forcing him to veer away momentarily. 2 of the riders managed to leap from their horses onto the passenger car behind them. Ben saw them through the rear window. "They'll come through the cars to reach us," he warned. "Sam, watch the connecting door." Samuel positioned himself near the door while Nora continued to fire at the remaining riders, trying to keep them from boarding. The train rounded a bend, momentarily giving them an advantage as the horsemen had to navigate rougher terrain. The door connecting to the passenger car rattled, then burst open. Samuel fired twice, driving the intruders back. Shouts and screams could be heard from the passenger car as innocent travelers dove for cover. "We need to end this before civilians get hurt," Ben growled. Just then, the train began to slow as it approached a steep grade. The horsemen used the opportunity to make another attempt at boarding. Jenkins and one other rider successfully jumped onto the platform of the marshal's car. The next minutes were a blur of gunfire and desperate struggle. Jenkins crashed through the window, firing wildly. Ben took a bullet to the arm but remained standing. Samuel grappled with the second man, their struggle sending them crashing against the walls of the swaying car. Nora aimed her revolver at Jenkins, but before she could fire, the train lurched violently as it began the steep climb. She lost her balance, crashing to the floor as her weapon slid away. Jenkins saw his opportunity and lunged for her, grabbing the leather pouch that still hung around her neck. The cord snapped as he yanked it free. "Got them," he shouted triumphantly, holding up the documents. "No," Nora cried, scrambling to her feet. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Samuel, having subdued his opponent, turned at Nora's cry. Seeing Jenkins with the documents, he launched himself across the car. Jenkins raised his gun. 2 shots rang out simultaneously, one from Jenkins's revolver, one from Ben's. Jenkins staggered, a crimson stain spreading across his chest from Ben's bullet. But his own shot had found a mark as well. Samuel stumbled, clutching his side as blood seeped between his fingers. "Samuel!" Nora screamed, rushing to his side as he collapsed onto one of the benches. "I'm all right," he gasped, though the pallor of his face belied his words. The papers. Nora turned to see the documents scattered across the floor where Jenkins had fallen. She gathered them quickly, checking to ensure all were accounted for. "We have them," she assured Samuel, kneeling beside him to examine his wound. "Just hold on, we're almost to Denver." Ben had already torn strips from his shirt to create a makeshift bandage. "The bullet went through clean," he said after examining Samuel. "He'll need a doctor, but if we can stop the bleeding, he should make it." The remaining hours to Denver were the longest of Nora's life. She sat with Samuel's head in her lap, whispering promises and prayers as the train sped toward their destination. Ben had secured Jenkins, who had survived his wound, and the other assailant, adding 2 more prisoners to his charge. When they finally reached Denver, a contingent of marshals met them at the station, alerted by telegraph from Sweetwater. Samuel was immediately taken to a doctor, while Ben escorted Nora directly to Judge William Harper's home. The judge, a stern man with piercing eyes and a reputation for incorruptibility, reviewed the documents with growing outrage. "This is exactly what we've needed," he told Nora. "With your testimony and these papers, we can finally bring Blackwell to justice. Will I need to stay in Denver?" She asked, anxious to return to Samuel. "For now, yes," Harper replied, "but you'll be under the protection of federal marshals. Blackwell's reach is long, but even he can't touch you here." 2 weeks later, Edgar Blackwell was arrested in Cheyenne, charged with conspiracy, corruption, and 3 counts of murder. The news spread throughout the territory, bringing shock to some and vindication to many who had suffered under his influence. Samuel, recovering in a Denver boarding house with Nora rarely leaving his side, read the newspaper account with satisfaction. "You did it," he told her, reaching for her hand across the breakfast table. "Those families will finally have justice." "We did it," Nora corrected him. "I never would have made it without you." The doctor had declared Samuel's recovery remarkable, though he would carry the scar of Jenkins's bullet for the rest of his life. Each day he grew stronger, and with his recovery came discussions of the future. "Judge Harper has offered me a position teaching at the new school for girls here in Denver," Nora told him one evening as they sat in the boarding house garden. "It's everything I dreamed of," Samuel nodded slowly. "It's a fine opportunity. You'd be a wonderful teacher. But—" Nora prompted, hearing the hesitation in his voice. "But I have a ranch waiting for me in Wyoming," he said quietly. "It's not much compared to a life in Denver, but it's home." The distance between them suddenly seemed vast, though they sat just inches apart. "I don't want to lose you," Nora whispered. "Not after everything we've been through." Samuel took both her hands in his. "Then marry me," he said simply. "Come back to Wyoming as my wife. We can build that school you've dreamed of on our land." The children of ranchers and settlers need education as much as city girls. Tears sprang to Nora's eyes. "You would do that? Help me build a school?" "Nora, I would help you build anything you wanted," Samuel said. "A school, a life, a family." He smiled that slow smile she'd come to love. "Besides, I promised I wouldn't let anyone hunt you, remember? How can I keep that promise if you're in Denver and I'm in Wyoming?" Laughing through her tears, Nora leaned forward to kiss him. "Yes," she said against his lips. "Yes to all of it." They were married in Denver 3 days later, with Judge Harper officiating and Marshal Porter standing as witness. The following day, they boarded a train back to Wyoming, to the land and life waiting for them. 5 years later, the Dawson Ranch School welcomed its 20th student, a milestone Nora celebrated with as much pride as she'd felt at the birth of their son 2 years prior, and their daughter the year before that. The school building, constructed by Samuel and neighbors from surrounding ranches, stood proudly on a hill overlooking the expanded Dawson homestead. Edgar Blackwell's conviction had marked the beginning of a reckoning throughout the territory, as evidence of his corrupt dealings led to investigations of other powerful men. The railroad still came through Wyoming, but now it did so with fairer compensation to landowners and respect for existing settlements. On the 5th anniversary of their flight through the mountains, Samuel found Nora standing on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the distant peaks gold and crimson. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "I was thinking about how afraid I was back then," she admitted. "When I told you they would hunt me forever," Samuel chuckled, the sound rumbling against her back. "And I was right. They didn't get past me." Nora turned in his arms, studying the face that had become dearer to her than any other. The years had added a few lines around his eyes, and strands of silver had appeared at his temples, but his gaze still held the same steadfast courage that had sustained them both through their darkest days. "No," she agreed, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "They never did." As the last light of day faded from the Wyoming sky, Samuel and Nora Dawson stood wrapped in each other's arms, surrounded by the life they had built together, a testament to the truth that sometimes the most dangerous journey can lead to the safest harbor, and that love, once found, is worth every risk taken to defend it.